Welcome back to TFR. From time to time, we like to feature some of the greatest hits of all time. Today is one of those days as we dig deep into the archive and replay one of the most popular episodes. We hope you enjoy it as much as folks did the first time around. Here it is.
Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Monique Woodard joins us today from San Francisco. She is the founder and managing director of Cake Ventures, an early-stage venture fund investing in companies that address the needs of a world undergoing massive demographic changes. Prior to Cake Ventures, she was a venture partner at 500 startups. Monique, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, talk us through your background and your path to investing.
Yeah, so I grew up in rural Florida, and so not a place where you would expect for a VC to come from. Maybe I grew up on a farm, but I was always really into technology, and got a computer when I was like 8 or so, and I definitely think. Got a computer when I was about 8, but also played a ton of video games growing up. And I think that video games is a gateway drug to technology in a lot of ways for a lot of us who grew up in the 80s. And so went to University of Miami, thought I was going to go to law school, but was always sort of like tinkering on the internet on the side. And got really good at building products, really good at growth and moving traffic. And ultimately, a company based in the Bay Area knew of me and knew that I was good at building and asked me to come out and talk to them. And I had never been to San Francisco, didn't even have San Francisco on my radar as a place where I should be. But I was here for 36 hours and I moved 30 days later.
Wow.
And I've been in San Francisco ever since. And that really sort of immersed me in everything that was going on in Silicon Valley in 2008, right? So Uber, Airbnb, all of these people that I was now around were just building really interesting, cool things. And to be, in a place where that was happening on a regular basis was such a gift. And I started a community of founders with my friends and really started working closely with other entrepreneurs and introducing them to the investors that I knew, introducing them to other entrepreneurs and, just really being that bridge for a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders who weren't well represented in Silicon Valley and San Francisco at the time. And at one point, I sort of looked around and realized that I was doing a lot of the work of a VC without actually being a VC and more importantly, without the fund behind me to invest in all of these great entrepreneurs that I knew. And so I decided to try to make my way onto the investor side of the table. I was sending out cold emails. I was asking people at meetups if I could be their EIR. And then ultimately, I knew Christine and Dave over at 500 Startups, and I came in and was talking to a few people there about investing, and ultimately they invited me to join the team at 500, and so started investing out of their seed program. Also did some sub-Saharan Africa deals. And was sort of opening up a lot of the relationships there and having a great time doing it. And so that was sort of my entry point into venture. I decided to leave 500 in 2018, started scout investing at Lightspeed in the meantime. And all along the way, I was sort of putting together the thesis for the fund that I run now, which is Cake Ventures.
So why, launch your own fund? Why not continue with 500 or, work with Lightspeed or another large fund?
Yeah, I think, a few reasons. One, I'm definitely an entrepreneur at heart, right? And so starting a new fund and being an emerging fund manager, I think of that as just like, it's just a new type of business that I'm starting. And so there's definitely, the entrepreneurial itch to start something new. However, I think that you probably shouldn't start a fund unless you really, 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 really want to, because it is one
Just
of
like
the
a
most
startup.
painful. It is really one of the most painful experiences that you may ever have. And so I sort of, looked around, and there wasn't a fund in the market who was thinking about the world and thinking about demographic changes in exactly the same way that I was. And so I felt like my personal investing thesis was going to be really difficult to sort of wedge into a firm that was already in existence and already had a track record and a point of view and a thesis. And so, I just decided that, look, this doesn't really exist in the world, and I feel like I'm good enough to build it.
Yeah. So tell us about Cake Ventures, and maybe we'll start out with the origin of the name, and then tell us a bit about this thesis around, demographic changes.
Yeah, I think naming a fund is probably the hardest part of getting it. Forget pitching LPs. It's really, what are you going to call this thing?
Stuck with it once you pick.
Yeah, exactly. For a very long time. So I was sort of, brainstorming on a few different names, and I really wanted something that was very memorable and brandable and didn't sound like anything else that was already out there, right? It wasn't named after a tree. It wasn't named my last name. It was unique. And when I started thinking about the demographic changes, I always saw it as, these layers that were stacked on top of each other. So, at Cake, we invest in demographic changes that are changing the way that we should invest in technology. And those are changes to the internet user base. The first layer of the cake is, this massive aging market, 10,000 people turning 65 every single day. The second layer of the cake is companies that will get to billion-dollar outcomes based on the economic activity of women. So women as the primary user base driving companies to these large outcomes. And the third layer of the cake is the rise of a new majority where people of color become the majority in the US and already make up a global majority if you're building a global company. And so every time I thought about it, I just saw them stacked one on top of the other. And at some point, I just sort of got this layer cake idea stuck in my head, and I couldn't let go of it. And it wasn't really, I was like, calling a fund a cake, that's kind of, it's a little hokey, isn't it? People are going to think it's like, oh, that's so cute and sweet. And, maybe they will think that, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. And so I felt like that was the name. It's when you can't get something out of your head that you should probably just dive in and go with it.
I love the layers of the cake and the analogy. I mean, our firm's called New Stacks, so we think about the stacks and the layers as well. So there's kind of a loose similarity there. Monique, tell us a bit about how your background has kind of shaped your investment lens and philosophy.
Yeah, so I definitely, I fit into two layers of the cake, first of all,
Yeah.
and ultimately will fit into the third layer because everybody ages, everybody gets old. So definitely I have personal experience with two layers of the cake. But, when I look around at tech and I look around at innovation, I often see, I see a lot of investors investing in things that they end up being really familiar with. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been on the phone with someone and they say, oh, I invested in X because my kids were doing Y, right? Mm-hmm. Or, oh, I invested in this thing because, my wife was using it all the time, right? And so your personal experience drives so much of your investment lens and your point of view. And I think that a lot of products are getting built that are, they're great for, an engineer at Facebook who makes $200,000 a year and lives in San Francisco, right? But I think that there is a huge swath of the world that is missing out on a lot of innovation. I mean, what about the truck driver who makes $50,000 a year? Or what about the stay-at-home mom in Iowa? And I think that there's a lot of missed opportunity, and that often we are serving and building products for the 1% when we should be really building products for the 99%.
Couldn't agree more.
So I think, I grew up in a small rural town. I grew up on a dirt road. I have family members who are truck drivers. I have family members who are blue collar workers. And I'm really interested in innovation that touches the lives of, not real people, because everybody's a real person, but that touches the lives of a much wider variety of people. And so I definitely think my background kind of speaks to that and speaks to the kind of fund that I'm raising.
Do you find that the founders themselves also have a different profile?
Definitely. I think that the founders have a lot of life experience that mirrors the types of customers that they're serving, right? And I think that's great. I think that's, we need more variety of experiences in the entrepreneurs that we're backing, and we need more variety of companies that they're bringing to market. So I think that leads to sort of a natural diversity around a lot of different things.
Talk to me a bit about sourcing and selection and how that may be different, right? Like we hear about the Valley, it's an echo chamber. There's networks. Everyone gets referred in. A lot of people are backing pedigreed teams from this tech company, from that academic institution. I would expect, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I would expect your approach to sourcing is different than what's really common in the Valley, right? Being a part of the club. And then from a selection standpoint, how do you think your investment decisions or your process might be different than the common, we're going to invest in these really smart young white males that are building the next big DevOps, infrastructure platform?
Yeah. So, and we're in an interesting time right now because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We can't leave our homes for the most part. And now a company that is based in Atlanta looks exactly the same over Zoom as a company that's based in San Francisco in a lot of ways. So I think that, the Zoom of it all, the pandemic of it all has democratized access to investors in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so when I think about sourcing, it's, I might not be in Atlanta for another 6 months otherwise, but, now you can talk to me and I'm in my living room and you're in yours. So I think that kind of sourcing has been beneficial to investors like me. And then, I've written a lot. I've always been like a fairly prolific writer, although a little bit less so the last few months. And I think writing about the things that you are interested in and the things that the types of companies and the types of founders that get you excited is one really good hack to be able to attract the right kind of people to your fund and to what you're building. And so, I think that a huge part of my sourcing strategy has been around research, writing, and, being very vocal about what I'm looking for. And when I'm evaluating founders, after the sourcing comes the evaluation. And is this the type of team? Is this the type of company that I'm interested in investing in? And, I really think for me, the first phone call or the first Zoom is really just about getting to know the person and why they care about this problem enough to spend the next, 7, 10, possibly more years of their life on it. And so I really like to hear their origin story, where did they come from? Why did they choose this? Why not do something else? And that really is the first step for me in getting to know the team behind the product, because I think that's the biggest thing that I'm investing in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. You wrote this article kind of about e-commerce and baby boomers. I was quite surprised to see that it looks like boomers represent the majority of online shopping today. Can you talk about sort of that effort and kind of some of the key insights after, researching online shopping trends?
So I wrote a 60-page report, a 60-page white paper on sort of the aging market and what drives those consumers, in the paper is called Gray New World. And I really wanted to do a couple of things. One, collect some data and look at the research. And then two, actually talk to real people, which I think we don't necessarily do enough of.
Many white papers don't do that.
And, I have been talking to people about aging and boomers for a very long time. And sort of, I did my first aging related investment back in 2016. And, for a while, people were saying, oh, well, they're not online and they're hard to acquire. And I really wanted to and they don't adopt new technology. And I really wanted to debunk a few of those things. So when I asked, people what they wanted to use technology for, we got really interesting results. They actually wanted to use technology to connect with their doctors. And I actually conducted most of the research before the pandemic. So I released the white paper in February of 2020. And so did all of this research pre-pandemic. In pre-pandemic, they were already saying that they wanted to use technology to talk to their doctors. And so when sort of the boom in telehealth really happened in the pandemic, it was unsurprising, right? And very similarly, the boom in online shopping for this aging demographic was also kind of unsurprising to me, because that is exactly what they said they wanted. But I think it's a great thing. I think it was sort of happening in the background, and the pandemic rushed it to the surface so that everyone could see it. And I think that given the length of the time that many of us have been under lockdown and the ease at which, they have adopted things like Instacart and DoorDash and many other platforms, we're only going to see more accelerated adoption in people who are older. And, frankly, Gen X is getting older, and we've always been very online. And so I think that a lot of the platforms that people thought, someone over 55 would not use, that those myths are going to be completely debunked and just go away. And I think that there is a big opportunity for investors to invest. And we are starting to see a lot more investors investing in the aging space. Andreessen just led a deal into a company called Bold, which is online fitness for older people. And so I think we're going to start to see a lot more large firms following into the category. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
I feel like I saw some news that Alan Patrikoff or somebody really notable launched a fund that's focused on the aging population.
Yeah, Primetime Partners, Alan and Abby launched an entire fund dedicated to aging. So, aging is one of my 3 pillars, but their entire fund is dedicated to it. And I think the more we see more capital in the market and great people like Alan and Abby making good investments, the better.
It's interesting for me to hear that the desire has always been for the aging population to use technology to do a lot of these things. It just, maybe it's the existing tech solutions that are available just aren't easy enough to use. I think about my own parents, and they were forced to use Instacart, and now they are familiar with Grubhub and DoorDash and because of the pandemic. But in a lot of ways, the technology is just, maybe it's a little, the UIs or the UX or something about it might be a little too challenging, even though the desire is in fact there.
Yeah. And I think, there are also teams who are making decisions, who are definitely saying, look, this group of people, they're not going to use this anyway. So why should we make it easier? Why should we make the UX easier for them to use? Because they're not really our target audience. They're not our target customer, right? But if we go into development with this customer as a persona, because now we know that they are actually going to be using these apps and these platforms, then I think that completely changes the perspective of the team as they're building product, because they're actually going to be building toward making it easier for a much wider swath of people to use their products.
And remind me, do you focus exclusively on pre-seed and seed stage startups, or do you have a stage orientation?
I like seed. I'll do some pre-seed. I like the entire seed spectrum. So seed, pre-seed, post-seed, pre-A.
Okay.
Before the A.
And how many investments will you do from Cake Fund 1?
I'll do roughly 25 investments. So a relatively concentrated portfolio. Most of those will be in true seed companies, although I do have, some allocation for pre-seed, and, average check size is $500,000.
$500,000. Okay. And it will be in those three buckets that you mentioned before. Talk a bit about underrepresented founders and kind of your focus there, and some of the startups that you're interested in investing in the space that, have previously not gotten the attention that maybe they deserve.
Yeah, I think, there's been a lot of focus over the last, year, let's call it, on investing in and creating funds or programs for underrepresented founders, and even more specifically for Black founders. I don't know that a lot of those initiatives that just launched last year, so say around the time that George Floyd was killed, I don't know that they have done exactly what they purported to do. But when I decided to start Cake Ventures, I sort of went back in my portfolio and I ran the numbers on women and underrepresented founders, and I was pleasantly surprised that over 50% of the deals that I had done have been in women-led companies, and 60% of the founders that I had backed were underrepresented in some way. And so that's when I ran the numbers, it was Black, Latinx, LGBTQ, women, or veteran status. And I think, and that was without trying, right? I didn't go out and say, I'm only going to invest in this type of founder. But I think what happens is when you change who has the ability and the authority to write checks, you change the types of founders you get. And so I think one of the keys is having more diverse VCs having a seat at the table, right? Or having the ability to create their own funds and direct those in the ways that they choose to. So while there is no direct diversity mandate around Cake Ventures, I think that, my network and my previous experience and backing of an underrepresented founder sort of speaks for itself. And I think the layers of the cake also lend themselves to attracting founders who are working on those specific problems, especially I expect there to be a lot of women founders who are working on companies that will, that get to $1 billion outcomes based on a mostly female user base, right? I think the Bumble IPO showed that can be really successful. I think there are lots of public market examples of that being a winning thesis. And, on the third layer of the cake, I expect that there will be a lot of founders of color of some sort who are working on, interesting products that touch the lives of people of color, right? And consumers of color have been driving culture online for a very long time. And, you look at TikTok, right? And you look at every challenge that goes viral, or you look at the growth of Clubhouse, right? Mm-hmm. And you can certainly see that that people of color, consumers of color, have definitely driven the growth on a lot of these platforms.
Yeah. I mean, your point earlier in the interview about, people invest in what they know, and the older white gentlemen that invest that are technical, are probably finding a lot of young folks that look like them. Or you mentioned their kids, right? Their kids might grow up in an affluent sort of situation, playing certain games or buying certain products, and that is kind of in their sphere, right? And so, I think your point about changing the people that have the authority to cut the checks is a huge factor in changing the ultimate outcomes and the businesses that get funded.
For sure.
Monique, is there a common thread between all of your investments, whether it be the founders or the startups?
I definitely consider myself a consumer first investor. So I think the consumer, the experience of the consumer is really a common thread. I think I often look for companies or brands that can be a cult brand. I think Minted Cosmetics definitely sits in that category. I think Gemist, which is a direct-to-consumer jewelry company that I invested in as a scout, sits in that category. So I am looking for like the next big cult consumer brand, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be e-commerce. It can be consumer social. It can be, it could be a fintech product that speaks to the consumer. But I'm really interested in how the consumer continues to interact with technology in many different across many different categories, or occasionally, what is building out the backbone of those industries, right? What are the B2B products that are building the bones of those industries? So I think that is the common thread, is really thinking about and understanding the voice of the consumer and how do you build cult brands in each of these categories. I consider cake, I'm always asking myself, how do I build a cult brand in venture capital? Right. And so the cult brand is probably the long running theme.
Do you have any plans in place or any initiatives or projects to elevate cake to becoming this cult brand?
I do. I will let you know.
Oh, come on. Give us a hint. Give us a hint.
I do. I mean, I think one of the things that I think a lot about, how do you build net new entrepreneurs? And I think that there's one of the things that got me into entrepreneurship is having the ability and the space to be able to tinker and work on things that were interesting to me. And I think how do we enable people, often young entrepreneurs, the ability to tinker on something and hopefully, with the idea of hopefully turning it into a business one day. And then I also think about, the life cycle of a founder and CEO. How do we help founders and CEOs become stronger and build long-term founder-led companies? And I think that there's a big opportunity to level up CEOs around governance, EQ, building a team. I think, as we go on, I think a lot of the challenges of founders will be issues of diversity and inclusion that will tank otherwise perfectly successful and wonderful companies. I mean, we've seen it happen over and over again, from Pinterest to Uber to Carta, right? We've seen some of these challenges come up over and over again. And I think having early investors who have a regimented and clear pathway for you to take in addressing some of these challenges early is really beneficial for founders. And so those are the sorts of, real boots on the ground things that I think will make Cake a cult brand, as well as a few other things that I am keeping in my back pocket for now.
I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Monique, you made the decision to be a solo GP. Why that decision? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, I think the GP relationship is a very long-term one, right? And so you want to go into it with as much information and being as comfortable with the other person as possible. And I think, I have a great crew of investors that I've worked with at 500 Startups or that I've met in my travels. And there were certainly a couple of notable individuals who I would have loved to work with, but it just didn't happen at this time, right? And so rather than have a shotgun wedding with someone that I didn't know quite as well, I felt that I would probably be better off starting as a solo GP, getting the investments and the funds off the ground, and then moving into, the search for a GP. I think you can't force these sorts of things. It's like trying to force a marriage. You can't really force that sort of thing. So, while I'm a solo GP now, I don't anticipate being a solo GP forever. I think one of the pros is that, there won't be a GP breakup. Break up with myself.
It's funny though. A lot of the institutional LPs I speak with, when I chatted with them 4 or 5 years ago, they didn't do any solo GPs. Yeah. And now I would say more than half do solo GPs because they've looked at the data. And then second of all, they've seen the fallout from failed, founder GP relationships. Yeah.
I think, over the last, 3 to 4 years, there have been some notable firm breakups. And, I think a lot of the LPs who were in those firms, kind of saw those fall apart. And so suddenly solo GPs didn't look so bad. I also think that the operational stack for solo GPs has gotten really good, right? And so you've been able to see the operational piece of it become a little bit of an easier lift, right? And I think that's given a lot of LPs a level of comfort around being able to back a good solo GP. And you've seen solo GPs become successful, right? You've got Chris Sacca at Lowercase, who was famously a solo GP. Mm-hmm. You've got Samil Shah, mm-hmm. who also great solo GP. And so I think it's become a lot more commonplace. Mm-hmm. And once you have some examples of success, you're able to, an LP is able to see where someone can be successful as a solo GP.
Monique, this is a challenge that I face every day and I think about a lot. I'd love to get your feedback and advice and input on how you try and replicate yourself and scale yourself. Yeah. As the demands just continue to increase.
I wish I knew.
Me too.
I wish I had like a little machine that I could walk into, and then when you open the door, there would be 2 of me, right?
Careful what you wish for.
But with slightly less flaws in the second version. I think it's really hard. I think there's a great series on automation that came out of the Substack Automatter. A lot of that kind of like just using Zapier and using a lot of Slack and a lot of those things and making them work together, and automating as much of the process of investing, is kind of how I've approached it so far. But I think that, I think it's really hard to completely replicate yourself and scale yourself.
Well, it's tricky when there's only one person that can fundraise. It's Monique, right? There's only one person, at least at this point, that can ultimately make the investment decision, right? And that's Monique. And then when it comes to managing the portfolio, right? The founders, when they've got a problem, they want to call Monique. And so there's a lot of edge cases and other things that, people can get involved with and take over time. But it takes a long time. It's, there's one throat to choke at this point, and, all paths go through Monique at Cake. And, in my case, me at Newstack.
Yeah. And I think that solo GPs have to think about how much they can handle. And so that will be an impact on fund size and on portfolio construction, right? I couldn't do 100 investments as a solo GP, nor should I. And without, an entire team workhorsing around me. And so, that impacted the size fund I decided to raise. It impacted the portfolio construction, the number of companies that I decided to invest in, the number of board seats I'll take. So you have to be really honest about the limitations, and where you can scale back in order to leave yourself some room to scale up. And I also think having great LPs around the table who can be on your IC, and there's never any sort of replacement for you as the head fundraiser, head diligence officer, head sandwich maker. There's no one to replace that. But I think having great LPs, especially for emerging fund managers, is really a game changer. And I've been lucky to get some really great LPs, and I'm lucky to have institutional LPs and who have seen funds like this grow and help funds like this grow. And so I think the deeper you can get, the more experienced you can get your LP bench, the better.
You've taken a really proactive approach to managing your schedule and your time. A lot of people have come on this program and talked about how context switching is the toughest part of the job. You switch from fundraising to managing the portfolio, fighting some fires, to making an investment decision or doing customer references. I mean, there's just a lot of juggling and a lot of bouncing around. Can you talk us through kind of the way that you approach schedule and how you're intentional about it so that you can, develop some velocity and be productive?
Definitely. I mean, I think my strategy has changed over time and it's always evolving. But the way that I think about the calendar right now is Mondays are no meetings. It's very rare that I will have a meeting on a Monday, because Mondays are set aside for content production and doing things that are creative and, brand building for Cake Ventures. So it could be writing an article, doing some sort of video. It could be any of those things, but it's always something that is content and brand related. Tuesday through, let's say, Thursday, I decide that I'm not a morning person. So, let's just put that out there. This is about as early as it gets for me. Unless I have to do some call to Europe. I'm not going to be on the phone with you at 7 a.m.
I'm with you.
But mornings are set aside for like the most high cognitive thing that I have to do. And often that is fundraising or talking to LPs. And then, later on in the day, I kind of decide at some point that I will stop that because my cognition starts to go down a little bit. And then I can start to do things like, emails, helping founders, like the real tactical things that I can do, that I need to do. And then Fridays are kind of open season for getting to know people. Fridays are a potpourri. It's people I want to spend time with, people I want to get to know. It could be new founders who are sort of entering my network, and I just want to get to know them and want to talk to them early. And it's a fun, Fridays are like my favorite day, to be honest, because you never know what kind of interaction you're going to have, but I always find that it's someone who's really interesting to me, and, helps me think about something new that I probably wouldn't have had time to think about during the earlier part of the week.
Do you seek out folks for those meetings, or are those people that are coming to you?
Both. I will definitely seek out people who, I've been following this person on Twitter, but we've actually never had a conversation. I would love to get on the phone with them or on Zoom with them and just like get to know them one-on-one, right? Or, it's another emerging manager who I haven't caught up with in a couple of months. I want to get them on the calendar and just kind of catch up and see what they're up to. So it's a lot of those, right? And yeah, it comes through many different ways.
All right, Monique. So this next question is called 3 data points. I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation with a startup, and you can ask 3 questions for 3 specific data points in order to make a decision, right? Because this is how it works, right?
Okay.
So let's say your approach to invest in a consumer social business with 100,000 MAUs and 20% month over month growth over the past 3 months. The catch again is you can only ask 3 questions for 3 specific data points to make a decision. What 3 questions do you ask?
How much time is the average user spending in your app or product? What is the number one thing that they do when they open it? Is it take a photo? Is it shoot a video? What do they do? Third, I always want to know, is this riding on top of an ongoing trend or some sort of new consumer behavior? And so the question I often like to ask is, how is the consumer behaving differently because of this product? What new consumer behavior is being built on top of? Is it that people want to do cool dances on video? Mm-hmm. Is it that they want to listen to people talk about things? Like what is the new consumer behavior that you're building on top of?
Love it. Monique, what resources or advice, would you have to give to listeners, founders, and or investors?
I feel like a lot of people probably come in here and like tell you to read, like, I don't know, some great book by some stoic, but I spend a lot of my time consuming pop culture and, reading about streetwear and innovative new brands. And for most investors, I would say I would spend more, especially if you are a consumer investor, I would spend more time understanding what's cool in pop culture and what new trends and what new influencers and celebrities are doing and saying and showing their audiences and their fans, right? I think those can often be really interesting inflection points and really interesting touch points for the ways that the consumer industry is changing. So I spend a lot of my time on the gram, on TikTok. I read a lot of Hype Beast. You
gotta know what the kids are doing.
Yeah. So spend more time with talking to your kids about what they're doing and what they're interested in. And, that's kind of what I consume these days.
Monique, what do you know you need to get better at?
One of the things I'm always really impressed by in an investor is not just the ability to invest in a company, but the ability to sell a company. And there are lots of investors who I think are great at that sort of thing, like Kate Mitchell, who's the founding partner at Scale, David Hornick, who's now at the Lobby. And I'm always just super impressed by the ability to drive an M&A. And that's what I want to get good at.
Well, hopefully you'll have some of those soon. You'll get some practice. And finally here, what's the best way for listeners to connect with you?
I'm at Monique Woodard on Twitter. I'm at Monique360 on Instagram, at Monique VC on TikTok, or my website, Monique.vc.
Well, there you go. Follow her. She's Monique Woodard. Monique, as one fellow gamer to another, I really enjoy the conversation. Always have had a lot of respect for your mind and your lens on investing, and I've heard only great things. So, thanks so much for spending the time with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
All right, that'll wrap up today's interview. If you enjoyed the episode or a previous one, let the guest know about it. Share your thoughts on social or shoot them an email. Let them know what particularly resonated with you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that some of the smartest folks in venture are willing to take the time and share their insights with us. If you feel the same, a compliment goes a long way. Okay, that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember to over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks so much for listening.